What's a dark secret you found out about someone that completely changed how you saw them, but they don't know you know? I had a classmate in grades 4 and 5 who smelled so bad you could notice it from 2 meters away. No one wanted to be her friend because of it. She was also bullied for being overweight, along with her entire family, as her parents were obese. One day, she suddenly disappeared. 20 years later, I found out that my friend's child is good friends with her child. I looked at her profile and saw a post explaining how awful her childhood had been. Alcoholic parents, her father essaying her, and eventually being taken into foster care. Her parents hadn't paid the bills, which is why she never took showers. After learning all of that, I felt really awful. Story 2. My friend, who I always thought was decent and prudish, kept complaining about guys being perverts and hitting on her. Then one day, a very overweight guy we both knew messaged me, asking if my friend was interested in him. I said, no. He then sent me a video of her slowly and provocatively licking an ice cream cone and grinning while doing it. He said she would send him such videos all the time. He felt very uncomfortable and asked me not to tell her we had talked about it, and I promised I wouldn't. Basically, she was making guys think she was interested so they would respond, and then she could act like, oh, look, they're hitting on me. Once, we were outside, and she bought an ice cream cone, filming herself again while eating it. Her explanation was, I just want to test the camera effects. She doesn't know I know. Story 3. This is still unfolding, but a friend I've known for a few years recently went through a messy breakup. They only dated for 1 month, and at first I really felt for her. She was extremely upset, and I thought she had been love-bombed and mistreated. Then she shared screenshots. His messages during the breakup were unusually cruel and abrupt. Do not call me ever. Again, do not come to my house. And I do not care about the stuff you have of mine. That raised an eyebrow for me. Her story, along with the cropped screenshots she showed me, didn't fully add up. It's become clear that she is full-blown stalking him, true crime podcast level. Now, I'm trying to figure out how to cut ties without agitating her. Story 4. I used to socialize with the head of HR at the company where I worked. My best friend, who also worked there, and I, along with a few other people, would get together fairly often. The head of HR was genuinely cool, funny, smart, and fair. She was also a fundamentalist Christian, and for the first time I thought, here's someone who lives her faith without being obnoxious about it. She probably thought I was going to hell for being gay, but she never said a word. She just seemed to accept me and enjoy me for who I am. About 3 years into this friendship, I found out that her husband, whom I also liked a lot, had been previously married and had a daughter. But here's the thing. She made her husband never see or talk about his daughter. She and her husband had 2 daughters of their own, who obviously had no idea a half-sister even existed. No one at our company knew any of this. I have never felt such revulsion towards someone I had considered a friend. It was shocking, and I couldn't stand to be around her anymore. I never confronted her and remained polite and professional since she was still the head of HR. But it was one hell of a shock. Story 5. A couple I know has taken in multiple pets in a fairly short time, 8 in a year and a half. One of them is a small dog. From what I've seen, they take good care of their pets, but I'm not sure how they afford it, since both are on disability, not physically disabled. Basic vet checkups and vaccinations are expensive. However, I've noticed that they rarely walk the dog. Most of the time, they just let it out for a quick pee and then play with it inside. One day I was watching their daughter and asked if they wanted me to walk the dog since I was taking the daughter to a park. They looked horrified and said, "No, no, no." I was weirded out but just said, "Okay." Once we got to the park, the girl told me that her parents didn't want neighbors or anyone to really know about the dog. I asked why, and she said, "We're not allowed to have one. I can't tell my friends about it either." It turned out they have a permanent court-ordered ban on pet ownership due to poor living conditions, neglect, and abuse of pets they had long before I knew them. The father had previously beaten a dog for peeing inside after being left alone for 24 hours, and a neighbor had witnessed it happening in the backyard. Now, I can't see them as good people, and it has completely changed how I view them. Needless to say, I reported them for having the pets. Reading the animal abuse report has absolutely scarred me. Story 6. I used to be really involved with the family of one of my close friends. Her father was one of my favorite people. He was funny, caring, and the way he treated his wife was so special. There was this charismatic energy that really drew you in. Then one day, I found out from his daughter that he had been leaving love notes to his wife's sister, who was also her best friend, expressing that he was in love with her and wanted to run away together. The sister told him never to send them again and to go back to loving his wife. I couldn't look at him the same after that. I started to see his charisma as a facade. Over time, I slowly distanced myself from the family because I also couldn't look at the mother the same way. I don't believe my friend ever told her mother. I don't think anyone did. They're still married, and the wife's sister still spends all her time with them, but I just cannot imagine it. Story 7. My father-in-law passed away last year. For context, he spent a good 10 years in prison in the late 80s, right after my wife was born. He had always told us it was for running weed from California to other states. When we were looking through his paperwork for a will, we found his court and prison documents. It turns out he was not the weed cowboy he claimed to be. He had actually been convicted of aggravated assault, and the victim was my mother-in-law. My wife is the product of that crime. Needless to say, this complicated the grieving process and ruined our perception of him to the point that we ended up celebrating his death. Story 8. My friend told me that she walked into the gym well after school hours and saw a married male teacher getting a little too close with a married female teacher, not married to each other, while she was laughing and clearly enjoying it. They didn't notice her, and she immediately hightailed it out of there. She described what she saw, and we concluded that the only explanation was that they were cheating. If our husbands touched another woman like that, regardless of whether they were being intimate, that would be cheating. I moved schools, and the woman who had her rear massaged ended up working at my new school a few years later. I wasn't super close with her, but we became work friends, and I even coached her son, who was attending the school. I always felt a bit weird about what I knew, but I have never told a soul. Even if I had actually witnessed them doing the deed, I would never blow up someone's life like that. My friend only told me and a select few people she could trust. Another funny story from my previous school. My friend's student teacher hooked up with a single teacher there, and she spilled that he couldn't get it up. I wish she had never shared that gossip. I don't need to know, LOL. I'd feel bad for the guy, and it's a common thing that shouldn't be made fun of, but he is quite the douche bro. I'm sure he doesn't know that a bunch of his colleagues know this personal information about him. Story 9. One of my friends has an Excel spreadsheet filled with all his friends tracking their likes, dislikes, and similar details. There's even a scoring system for how likely he wants to hang out with each person. I was scored a 2 out of 10. At first I thought he just liked his space and didn't think much of it. It slowly dawned on me that the only times he wanted to hang out were when other people were involved, or when he needed something. I only found out about the spreadsheet because he asked me to fix something on his computer, and I saw a file on the desktop called Friendship Scorecard. Story 10. I pieced together that my work friend, who I have a crush on, was sleeping with our mutual work friend, who is married. Going by some of her vague Facebook posts, I'm pretty sure she also had a major feelings crash out over him. Feels bad, man. She might actually suspect, or at least wonder, if I know, just because I'm friends with him too. But she and I are both super private and avoidant, and we would never ever talk about anything like that. It's probably for the best that I know about it, at least from my end, because I'm in no state of mind right now to get into a relationship anyway. Knowing she could even do something like that made me realize she's no one I should be with, even if she were interested. But sadly, you can't logic your way out of a crush. Story 11. When I was 7 years old, I discovered my dad was having an affair. I didn't even know what an affair was, but I overheard my mom on the phone one evening with the people he said he was staying with that night, and he wasn't there. She was in tears, shouting that the last time this happened, she had found out he was at a hotel with his mistress. He'd since convinced her he'd stopped the affair. My mom implored me not to tell him I knew or mention it to my sister, who was 4 years younger. As far as I could tell, this was a mix-up, and the affair had indeed ended. When I was 34, my dad had his 60th birthday and received a card from his former mistress. It turned out the affair had gone on for the next 11 years, and in the end, she had ended it. Both my parents are now dead. I kept my promise to my mom not to tell him I knew. My sister, now 50, still doesn't know, and I can't see what good would come from telling her now. Story 12. I found out that my 50-year-old father has had, and still has, a cam girl addiction for 15 years, starting after his last wife finally couldn't handle him. Most of the performers are half his age or younger. He spends $100 to $200 a month on private sessions, even though he's $15,000 in credit card debt. He was always vocally anti-corn and constantly blamed me for financial problems. And he often said large age gaps were creepy when they came up in the news. In a vacuum, I don't think enjoying it is inherently bad, but seeing that kind of content in his history, after a divorce with a woman who hated him by the end, and how much he pays young women to do what he wants, makes me feel like she left him because he kept trying to control her or pressure her into things she didn't want to do. I hope she's much happier now. Story 13. My brother's brother-in-law is a terrible human being, and he doesn't know I know what he did. He once worked for Computer Sciences Corporation, a good-paying job, married, with a son on the way. His life seemed set. One day he decided not to take his bipolar medication, deliberately, and came into work, trashed his boss's office, and defecated on the conference table. He got fired. After that, he refused to work and relied on his wife's income from American Airlines, where she worked in HR. After 3 years, they divorced. He moved in with his parents and relied on their income for a few years, bouncing around jobs sporadically. Eventually, he got married again, but after 2 years, his wife realized what he was really like and divorced him. He moved back in with his parents. He married again, and 2 years later, divorced once more. His son has a poor relationship with him, as well as with his grandparents. On one occasion, one of my nieces was at the grandparents' house when he visited and started vaping in their den, despite being told not to. He is no longer welcome inside the house. Visits are now only from outside. Story 14. While cleaning out my mom's storage, I found a letter she had written to her best friend's husband, a love letter she never gave him. This was the husband of a family friend we had known for most of my life. They were work friends, and when we fell on hard times, this friend let my mom, dad, and my siblings move in with her and her husband. Later, we moved out, and that lady taught me how to sew and play piano, came to my high school, graduation, my wedding, and so on. Years later, about 30 years later, my mom and this lady are still close. I overhear them talking and laughing when I visit or call. To think my mom was in love with this lady's husband really humanizes her, if nothing else. Story 15. I had a tough boss that I just wasn't clicking with. I could tell he was pushing me to reach my potential, but at times it felt like he was going too far. One weekend, frustrated, I managed to find his Reddit account, the one he's been posting on a couple of times a year since college, over a decade ago. Reading it, I saw he struggled with the same uncertainties around relationships, career, and politics that we all do in our 20s. It humanized him completely and helped me understand that he was figuring life out for the first time, too. Story 16. When I was younger, I worked at a dentist's reception, and there was one patient who always seemed extremely stone-faced and, to me, rude. She never smiled, and announced herself with what I thought was extreme RBF. I tried to be extra nice and welcoming, but I always got the same perceived rudeness back. After one visit, a note appeared in her chart: facial paralysis. I don't know why I never considered that as a possibility, even though I grew up with a disabled parent and thought I was aware enough. It completely changed the way I think about people's backstories and personal challenges. Story 17. I had a boss who everyone hated, just unnecessarily mean, often dressed down employees in front of everyone, super demanding, never acknowledged anything good, and generally disliked by all. Except for one employee who had been with the company for over a decade and absolutely adored the boss. It was a real head-scratcher. I later learned that many years earlier, this employee had gotten completely trashed at the company Christmas party and punched the boss in the face. Instead of firing them, the boss personally paid for a stint. In rehab, the employee apparently had a serious drinking problem. To this day, I can't reconcile that decision with the complete D-bag I worked for. Story 18. Nearly 20 years ago, I found out from a cousin that my mom had been married and divorced before marrying my dad and having me. There were no children from that marriage, and I don't know any of the details, but it must have happened sometime between 1969 and 1976. My mom doesn't know that I know, and I've never brought it up. I assume there's a reason she never talked about it, and if she ever wants me to know, she'll tell me herself. Story 19. One night, my ex's brother got drunk and told me that my ex had accidentally killed his mom when he was 13. Up until then, I had been told she died of alcoholism. It answered a lot of questions about his behavior, but he genuinely scared me on several occasions. His attitude toward women was deeply strange. You had to be just like his mom, but also nothing like her, and treat him like a child, but not in a way that felt patronizing because he was a man. He would have literal tantrums, including foot stomping if he didn't get his way. He also accidentally hit me once and knocked me over. I eventually had to leave the country to get away from him. He stalked me online until I had to call the police in my home country because he was threatening to show up at my apartment. Story 20. There's a lady who is pretty big on the charity scene in my area. She has the image of a good Christian woman. My company cleaned for her, and I overheard an incredibly racist conversation she was having. NDA bound, I couldn't expose her publicly, but the best I can do right now is quietly influence my networking groups and the companies I work with not to use her services or accept her money. Story 21. I had a friend I met through an old job move to the city we both used to live in. I indirectly convinced her to move. There, some months after I arrived, she had some bad habits, a drinking problem, could be a bit manipulative, and was reckless, thinking fate or life would just cover for her mistakes. Within just a few months of moving, she shaved her head and started partying too much. She lost her wallet on K, and a friend and I had to search for it around the venue we were at. She skipped work a lot. I had even gotten her a job where I worked, maybe a bad idea, and she ended up dumpster diving for bagels from a local place because she couldn't afford groceries, all while asking me for $10 for beers after work, which I said no to. None of this was the secret in question, OP, but over a year later, I found out she had suddenly moved away back then and shaved her head because she got caught stealing her neighbor's Amazon packages and was worried she'd get arrested. She flew back in an emergency to the city where we had originally met. It was a wreck. I knew she was messy, but it really flipped something in me to learn she not only stole from people around her like that, but never told me, all while acting like a victim and feeling so sorry for herself at the time. She still doesn't know that I know. I found out later through a mutual friend. Story 22. My brother-in-law got his girlfriend pregnant and then abandoned her, moving halfway across the country. After the baby was born, his girlfriend killed herself. Apparently, her mother is raising the child. My brother-in-law doesn't claim the kid, doesn't pay child support, and does nothing. Now he's engaged to another woman who knows nothing about any of this. Story 23. I found out that my grandma wasn't the best person. Far from it. Apparently, she was a stereotypical office bish when she was younger. On one occasion, she convinced a forgetful coworker that he had left his suitcase at home, when in reality, he had just misplaced it at work, and she knew this. I can look past that part. What I can't look past is that she knowingly started an affair with a married man, which destroyed that marriage. Obviously, he's at fault too, but it takes two people for an affair. I also can't forgive how she mistreated my mother when my mom drove to her home every day to take care of her once she couldn't manage on her own. There is no excuse for that. Not then, not now, not ever. But after learning about her past, a lot of things about her behavior made more sense. Story 24. I used to go out for breaks because it was use it or lose it, and the job sucked. Even 15 minutes away was a chance not to see those people. One time, I was out on my phone when one of the few women in the building passed by on her way to her car. She pulled away. About 2 minutes later, I saw what looked like her minivan pull into a parking lot 2 blocks up, and another coworker jumped out of his truck and into her minivan. When her last name changed a few months later on email and her nameplate, I wasn't exactly shocked. Apparently it was a well-known secret. Side note, around the time I noticed it, word apparently got to the VP as well. Not from me. I tried to avoid gossip. There was an all-hands meeting, and the other guy was there, but not the woman. Right before the meeting, the guy said something, and the VP remarked, "I hear you're getting around a bit." The guy, not the wisest person in any room outside a kindergarten, said, "You had your chance." The VP gave him a look and replied, "I'm not sure what that means, but I'll be sure to remember it during your next review." The guy wasn't around much longer. Maybe 9 months, long enough for the woman to get her divorce. Story 25. My Auntie Tay recently passed away from cancer, but in her younger years in the 1980s, she helped care for young queer people dying of AIDS after their families rejected them. The youngest person she took care of was a 16-year-old gay boy who was terrified God was sending him to hell for being gay. She told him God loved him, and that the hateful words of people are meaningless because God is love, and hateful people don't know God. He got to die in peace with her holding his hand. She used to tear up telling that story. Her care for sick people included washing their bodies and granting them dignity in death. She was a lesbian herself, a rebellious Catholic, and kind of a family black sheep, but she had a heart of gold, and I miss her. I hope she's reunited with all the people she helped in heaven. Story 26. I found out after my dad died that he had been in the Freemasons, the lodge, prior to marrying my mum. He was Protestant, and mum is Catholic. He gave it up to marry her. Those kinds of marriages carried a big stigma in Scotland in the 1960s. They were married nearly 60 years before dementia took him from us. He was a mining mechanical engineer, a ticket earned through years of promotions in the mines, but in the late 70s when we emigrated, he went to night school and got his high school equivalency so he could help us with our homework. I knew he was a good man, but I learned he was better than I ever thought. Story 27. My now ex has an unhealthy dependence on using ChatGPT, where he spills all his secrets, being an Adderall user, a gambling addict, and a cheater. Now he's absolutely obsessed with his looks and doing unhealthy things to look smacks. I also found out he fell down the red pill manosphere content rabbit hole. Yup, it was quite the shock. I walked away, but my head is still spinning, even 2 months later. I would have never imagined it because he had always been so gentle, kind, and caring in the relationship. 4 years down the drain. The anxiety is high at this point in my life. Story 28. My step-grandfather slammed my grandmother's head into the metal fence at their ranch when a cow ran out. I cannot see him as the sweet and loving grandfather I did for the 12 years prior. I've seen him only once in the past 7 years, and I just avoided him. We used to ride the side-by-side or four-wheeler through their land and under waterfalls, but I can't be around him now. Story 29. I found some things that made me pretty certain my dad is gay. Other details, not what makes me think he's gay. He and my mom have been separated for about 15 years, and he hasn't dated any women since then. He's very conservative and actually homophobic, without coming across as too flamboyant. He just doesn't naturally embody traditional heterosexual masculinity. I'm not homophobic, so honestly I don't care. Part of me is sad that he won't accept his authentic self, but I also have a strained relationship with him, so I just leave it alone, as I do with most things about him. Story 30. My parents have been divorced since I was very young. I'm in my late 30s now. I remember my dad not being the best person, mostly from things my mom had told me. He tried to reconnect with me mostly through social media, since my mom never allowed him to see us, and we moved around a lot when I was younger. As far as I know, he had no other way to contact us. I mostly ignored him because of the whole terrible person thing. However, I recently found out from my aunts and uncle, my mom's brother and sisters, that my mom is a pathological liar. Unfortunately, I never got the chance to reconnect or potentially have that relationship with him because he died a few years ago. I'll never know if what my mom told me about him was true, and I think that will be my biggest regret in life, not finding out for myself. Story 31. A handful of years ago, my uncle said to me, "How does it feel to be the only one to inherit the family estate?" It was a confusing comment, but I just assumed it was because, out of my dad's brothers, I was the only child of the whole family. My uncle is happily married and in love with another man, and my other uncle didn't have any legal children. A couple of years later, I found out that my own dad had 2 other children. He paid off both of their mothers to leave and never come back before I was born. I have never asked my dad or brought this up with him. The source of the information was my very own mother. Story 32. One of my oldest friends, who I've known since middle school, is pregnant with her second child, due in January, and hasn't told me yet. The reason I know is that our mothers are friends, and hers told mine in confidence. Her mother, who I never thought was the voice of reason in the family, apparently scolded her for not telling me, but she said she wanted to tell people herself. She lives 5 minutes from me, and to be fair, we don't see each other often, but I find it odd that she hasn't shared the news at all. We also have a group chat that's been active in the meantime, yet no mention. Adding to the weirdness, this is the third time in the last year that someone close to us didn't share a pregnancy until the last minute with us and many other friends. 2025 was a strange year. Story 33. I have a friend who is chubby and always has been for as long as I've known her. What always perplexed me is that she is really active. She walked the Camino de Compostela, basically across France, Spain, and into Portugal. Goes on hikes frequently, swims, does jazzercise, kayaks, and more. Every time she invited me to eat, she just ate normally, and I never really saw her snacks. Then she tried to off herself. On a visit to the psych ward, she asked me if I could bring her a couple of chocolate bars and a jar of peanut butter. When I came back, the nursing staff confiscated them in front of me, but not the bottles of Pepsi, not the bags of chips. That's when I learned she would frequently watch corn while obsessively eating homemade Reese's Cups by breaking her. Hershey's chocolate bars, using 2 squares and scooping out as much peanut butter as she could with her fingers. She would eat the entire jar of peanut butter in a single evening, a feat that took upwards of 20 Hershey's bars to accomplish. And she did this a couple of times a week. It was hard seeing her as the well-adjusted person I always thought I knew after that. Story 34. I found out a friend of 22 years assaulted his wife and then fled the state when she called the cops. When his kids didn't want anything to do with him because of what he'd done, he decided they were dead to him and that he'd make new ones. Then he married a second woman in a religious ceremony to avoid divorcing his first wife and losing half his possessions. He used his religion to justify his actions, and I lost 100% of any respect for him. I have never wanted anything to do with him since. Story 35. Knowing that my sister-in-law is just like me when it comes to emotions and friendships has been eye-opening. I've known her for a year now, and being with her this Christmas made me realize that she is just as vulnerable as I am. Going through friendship breakups, not having fully close girlfriendships, and being more one of the boys. Hearing her express sadness about her boyfriend not coming because it's too far, and her friends canceling without explanation, makes me respect her even more and want to be her friend even more than before. We are just the same, even if we're on slightly different paths in life. Story 36. My great-aunt's husband essayed my grandmother, and my mother was the result of that event. My great-auntie stuck by him. He was jailed for being a serial gang apist and banned from living in the town where he lived, yet she still stood by him. She used to care for my great-grandmother, and I used to look up to her, but not anymore. The same grandmother was married to another man, whom I grew up thinking was my grandfather. It turns out that after my grandmother was assaulted, they divorced, and my mother was never treated like part of his family. My mother has bipolar disorder. He was always so nice to me, and I still wonder how someone could do something like that to a child. My mother, despite what she went through as a child, I always tried to see past it. She was hard to live with, but I always wanted to be close to her and tried multiple times to have a relationship with her. Then I found out she was violent toward my father, cheated on him multiple times, conceived my sister with my childhood friend's older brother, and then walked out on both me and my father, leaving me with him. When she got settled, my father tried to get her to see me and would drive me 40 minutes to the McDonald's near her. She wouldn't show. Being young, I thought it was something with my dad, but it turns out she just didn't want to see me. I only found out some of this 2 or 3 years ago. I'm about to turn 33. She just goes from bad to worse, and we no longer have contact. Story 37. When I was in high school, there was a classmate that all the teachers liked, especially those who taught philosophy and related subjects. I considered him very cultured. He read a lot, understood complicated topics, and spoke formally, using complex vocabulary. I was already trying to talk to him when a friend told me that he had weird liking, was harassing a classmate who was straight, had saved pictures of him, and that the classmate had shared what he did with those pictures. He is non-binary, and apparently nobody accepts him, and that's why they distance themselves. But it wasn't about that. It was about his actions. For example, we had a project where he was supposed to be present at a certain time that night. He agreed, but when the time came, he left without caring. Even his mom was rude to the whole team. With all that, I understood why nobody spoke to him. Story 38. My mom has a friend group she grew up with, made up of 3 sisters. One of them had been seeing a guy for as long as I can remember. I thought they were married, but they weren't. He grew up in a city a few hours away and would visit his family for a few weeks a couple of times a year. I found out about 5 or 6 years ago that he was married to a woman in his hometown who thought he was leaving town for work. They had been living this double life for over 30 years. I don't know how my mom's friend found out, or if the other woman knew, but it's wild. He had 2 kids with my friend's mom. They all visited his hometown, met his family, who must have known he was married. It blows my mind how a family could be okay with all that. He was also a very bad alcoholic, had a heart attack at 28 from drugs, got cancer 2 years ago and refused treatment, and died earlier this year. It's really sad. His immediate family is upset because he refused treatment. I'm not sure if his wife even knows he's dead. It's not funny, but it's true. Story 39. I had a holier-than-thou aunt who was a very devout Catholic, even forcing us to go to church with her when we went abroad on holiday. It turns out she has, though I'm not sure of the exact order, embezzled money from every company she worked for, narrowly avoiding prison the last time, had affairs with most of her bosses while married. So much so that her first child may not be her ex-husband's at all, and she even had an affair with a priest. She used the money she stole from her workplaces, all small companies, some family-run, to go on extravagant holidays, buy designer clothes, and generally pretend she had it all together. This may not count, as she may suspect I know something. She blocked me not long after my dad died, my dad being her brother, and the only one who would protect her and try to cover up her wrongdoings. Her kids still think the world of her, as far as I know. I'm not sure they know the full truth, but anyone in the family who does know won't tolerate her anymore. Story 40. When my father died, I found out that his ex-wife had forged the next of kin paperwork, so she received the death notification instead of me. I discovered this because I raised hell with the facility director. He had left everything to me anyway, since I was the only child who still visited him, and the one who got him the help he needed. I took the money, set some aside for my special needs little brother, and left the post-death tasks to her and the kids she had with him. That left them on the hook for some of it. I don't speak to them, and I never will. I laugh when I hear through the grapevine that they are still paying off his burial. Story 41. I was in an 8-month relationship with a man I had been in love with for over 10 years. Once I realized I had over-romanticized the relationship in my mind, I left him. A mutual friend of ours, who had originally been his friend, later told me she had been dying to share a horrible secret. She revealed that he hired women and even showed one of her male friends how to order women online. Suddenly, the whole relationship and his actions while we were together made sense. He doesn't know that I know this. He has since tried to reach out to me twice, even after we broke up, and I asked for no contact ever again. I will never let him know that I know. Story 42. That we put the pieces together about my grandmother. She was always a bit feisty. One odd way this showed up was that after she got angry at someone, it was often hard to figure out why, because she wouldn't say a word at the time. It always came down to some misunderstanding or incident. When she got mad, she would completely reject and cut off her adult child, and that child's entire family, for years. She'd say horrible things about them to the other kids. There were always at least 2 kids. She hated at any given time. Then suddenly, it would be over, and she'd act like nothing had happened and no time had passed. Another child would become the new, hated one. Her kids were all so desperate for her love and approval that they just accepted it. When I was about 15, she cut off my dad and our immediate family for about 8 years. Then, suddenly, we were okay again. By then I was married. My husband and his family were really into genealogy, and because we hoped to have kids one day, he decided to research my family. My dad found it fascinating and was telling my grandmother about it. She seemed very interested and wanted to know more, so Dad arranged for us to meet her and share what we had found so far. It was early in the research, so there wasn't much yet, but during the conversation, my husband started explaining the kinds of records we could access. Birth certificates, deaths, marriages, land purchases, censuses, and other legal documents. She got quiet. I thought she was just listening. After we left, she tore into my dad about how we were digging into her business and was furious. We, my husband and I, were cut off. That was the first time I had seen a grandchild cut off. We didn't let it bother us and just went about our own way. We were never forgiven. Of course, we figured it out eventually. Yep. She lied about her wedding date and age. She said she was 16 and that my dad was born a year or two after they got married. In truth, she was 14, my grandfather was in his 20s, and my dad was born just 2 or 3 months after the wedding. I'm guessing that's why her very religious family cut ties when she got married. We also learned that she was my grandfather's second of 3 wives. My grandfather was from another country. His first wife had also been 14. A couple of years after they married, he left her and their child to come to our country and work, which eventually led him to my grandma. She had been lying about dates and stories her entire life, and even about her name. She had taken her older sister's name and age. Grandma and my grandfather had several kids, and then he left her for another woman. I think his third wife was 16 or 18. It changed how I saw her anger, the abuse and manipulation she put her kids and grandkids through, and how her family treated her and us. We never told anyone what we learned. It wouldn't have changed anything. By then, she had dementia and was in a nursing home, and no one ever asked again after that night she got mad at us. I can't say I forgive her for the way she treated people. At the same time, I can't imagine being abandoned by your family at 14 and left to raise 5 kids alone. She was scrappy and fierce and a narcissist, probably out of self-preservation. Yes, she was a huge AH, and the impact of her actions on her kids and grandkids was horrible. But I also see the impact of religious and social blackballing, poverty, neglect, and abuse cascading down generations. It's sad. Story 43. My father-in-law left my mother-in-law for another woman when my husband was in middle school. It devastated him, his brothers, and obviously his mother. It's affected him far more than he's willing to admit. He says his dad left because the other woman manipulated him. When he finally got away, he didn't want to come home because of the guilt. It took him 7 years to finally return, and another 2 years, 9 in total, to fully invest in his marriage again. I thought, okay, this woman really messed him up. He made a mistake and just couldn't get over it for a while. Then I found out from other extended family that he didn't just have an affair with one woman. There were at least 4 more. When I learned this, I realized he wasn't really manipulated. He just couldn't keep his impulses in check. Story 44. When I was 13, I found out that my grandmother had cheated on my grandfather with her daughter's boyfriend. They both got pregnant at the same time, and my grandma kept quiet. No one knew the baby wasn't my grandfather's. About 35 years later, my cousin, my aunt's child in this situation, who was very close to his uncle, confided that he was certain they were brothers. They ended up taking a DNA test and confirmed it with the father, who was still in the picture. By the time they confronted my grandmother, she already had severe dementia, and my grandfather had long since passed. I have no idea how my aunt felt about the matter, or if she ever found out. My mom told me this story once in conversation, like it was just normal family drama. I saw my aunt, cousin, uncle, and grandmother a bit differently after that. Story 45. My best friend of 30 years still lived with his mom and dad and relied entirely on them for financial support, as he refused to get a job. For a brief period, I was living in one city and working in another. The city I worked in was where he lived, so occasionally I stayed at his place if I had to be at work early. When I stayed there, I used his computer and opened the history to check a page I had visited the week before. That's when I found history of gay porn he liked to watch. His parents are very religious and would likely cut him out of their lives entirely if they found out. So he pretends to be straight just to keep their love. I've never told him that I know. Story 46. I clean houses for a living, and I don't snoop. My integrity is paramount in my line of work. One day, I noticed some paperwork left blatantly out in the open and saw that my client is basically paying for all of her relatives' lives. She always came across as snobby, standoffish, and stressed as hell for someone who hasn't worked since college, but managing an entire family tree of expenses is clearly a full-time job and a major source of resentment. She's very kind to me when I'm there, but in her office, she's almost demonic on the phone. I'm sure it's because her deadbeat relatives keep demanding more and more of her husband's salary. Story 47. I found out my mom had an affair with my uncle, my aunt's husband on my dad's side. I was younger and nosy and read messages between them. I knew my mom was seeing someone, but for some reason this someone was picking her up a block away from our home, and she had to walk to his car. That's when I connected the dots. By the time she had this affair, he and my aunt were divorced, but they never stopped seeing each other, and the whole family knew they were still together in a weird way. This made me think poorly of my mom. Her dating history is already messy, and this felt like the cherry on top. I felt like she knows no limits and doesn't respect anything. This uncle was also my dad's best friend. They grew up together, which is how he met my aunt. I just feel it was completely unnecessary. Story 48. I've spent most of my adult life estranged from my parents, and by extension much of my family, but I did open up communication for a while when my nephew was born, because I didn't want to be the aunt he never knew. During that time, I found out that my mother's boyfriend had maintained a relationship with one of his ex's daughters, since he had basically been her dad, until my mother found out and made him cut it off. I don't know whether she knows that I know, but it absolutely affected my already low opinion of her. On top of everything else, I added extremely insecure to that list. In my opinion, she's not that great of a catch, so I also judged the boyfriend for choosing her over someone he basically raised. He was the one who told me, though, so he doesn't count for this question. Story 49. I learned that my nice grandma, and my grandpa, I assume, actually abandoned my mother as a baby. She spent a few years in an orphanage as an infant and toddler. My mom didn't know either, but she was always stressed about everything and suffered from stress-induced illnesses throughout her teen years. I'm convinced that being abandoned as a baby left her deeply insecure and anxious. She later died of cancer, and it's possible that the lifelong stress contributed to it. I never visited my grandparents after learning this, though they probably never noticed since one had Alzheimer's and the other didn't care about people, even couldn't recall my name. Story 50. My friend has a brother she hadn't seen for years, and he suddenly showed up out of nowhere and moved in with her and her 3 little girls. I got a weird vibe from him and did a bit of sleuthing. It turns out he had been in prison for about 10 years because his baby wouldn't stop crying, and he deliberately dropped her on her head. She survived but is permanently affected, blind, and in a wheelchair. I haven't seen that. Friends since and make excuses whenever she wants to meet. Story 51. I have a cousin who was adopted, but he didn't know he was adopted. It turned out he's not actually adopted, but the biological son of my uncle and his mistress. He was raised by my aunt and uncle, who had promised to tell him together when he was older. Unfortunately, my aunt passed away when he was 8, and my uncle is keeping the promise. He won't tell him without her. I was really close to their family as a kid, and my aunt was dearly loved by her husband, so it was a big surprise to me when I found out. To this day, I can't look at my uncle the same way anymore. Story 52. My father-in-law's long-term partner doesn't know that we all know they were having an affair while my mother-in-law was dying of cancer. My mother-in-law had proof of the affair, but did nothing because she felt my husband and siblings had enough to deal with. Coming to terms with the terminal diagnosis and the grief that would follow, she swore her best friend to secrecy. 15 years later, that best friend received a terminal diagnosis herself, and in her final days, she asked for my sister-in-law and told her everything. My sister-in-law had always suspected it. The woman has behaved poorly towards some family members over the years, always playing the victim and insisting that family didn't like her because my mother-in-law was seen as a saint she couldn't compete with. Knowing what I now know, I realized that was the only truthful thing she ever said. My mother-in-law truly was a saint, and that woman will never be anything like her. A lot of things now make sense, and not in a good way. Story 53. My ex-boyfriend wasn't particularly good with animals. He seemed like he'd never had pets and treated them as though they were made of glass. He spoiled our 2 cats with treats and human food, but never helped with the less fun parts, vet bills, litter boxes, or giving a flea bath that was needed. Oh, once. Long story. He mostly saw them as accessories. One time, he had something fragile but replaceable on the edge of a table, a glass tobacco pipe. Our 9-month-old kitten swatted it off and broke it. It was frustrating, but it cost $5 to replace, and he broke things like that often on his own. Instead of letting it go, he started chasing the cat, yelling and acting like he was going to spank it. I ran up and stopped him, got him to calm down, and we went to a smoke shop 3 blocks away to get a new one. After breaking up with him, I found out from 3 separate people that he had abused his previous cat so badly that it was taken from him and later died from its condition. Now I live in fear of dating a psychopath. Who beats a frigging cat? Story 54. I had a much older woman neighbor whom I looked up to as a child. I later found out that her spoiled child was the result of an affair with an older man who was already married at the time, which explains why we never saw him in person and only heard about him from their stories. Recently, she and her child discreetly visited this man in his province, where he currently lives with his legal wife and legitimate children. The visit was kept hidden from his wife and was made possible with the help of his relatives, who enabled the situation. I lost all my admiration for her after this, especially since my own family was broken apart because of cheating. I still answer her greetings every morning, though, because I can't afford to be rude. She's older than me, and in our culture, respecting elders is important. Story 55. My friend H's father passed away 3 weeks ago. I met H during a brief teaching stint, and we stayed friends after I quit. H posted her father's photo on her WhatsApp status, and I thought he looked familiar. The next day, she posted his national ID photo from when he was much younger, and that's when I was completely sure when and where I had met him. He was 66 when he passed. I can't remember the exact year, but it was between 2009 and 2011. I had attended my friend D's sister Kay's wedding. We are Muslims, so Kay being a second wife was not unusual. Second, third, or even fourth wives are legally registered in Malaysia and have the same rights as the first wife. I stayed at the ceremony longer than other guests to help out, and the husband asked if I was a family member. I said no, just the bride's sister's friend. The crazy thing is, I had been teaching at a university and had heard rumors about a student going through mental health issues because her father married a new wife. The descriptions match Kay perfectly, so I realized that the student's father's wedding was the one I had attended. I later learned from D that the husband's previous wife was very sickly, which was why he married a younger new wife, Kay. Fast forward to 3 weeks ago. When I saw H's second post, I recognized her. Father. I asked if H's mother was well, and she said she was fine, just that she needed insulin injections for her diabetes. So H's mother was not dying when her father married his new wife. Somehow, I feel a bit guilty for having celebrated that wedding. H's father passed away surrounded by H's family, and I wonder what became of his second wife. My friend H seems genuinely caring for her father. She went back to their hometown many times despite working quite far away. Knowing how he married a second wife and caused a lot of pain to her siblings, and yet seeing her speak about him positively fills me with respect for her. Polygamy ruins families. I know that firsthand, as I am the product of a polygamous marriage. It is terrible and traumatic, and no one should go through it. Though it's a small world, long before I met H, I had already met her father and sister. Story 56. A friend I am no longer that close with, since we now live in different countries, told me repeatedly that she was craving male attention and looking to hook up with anyone, including a man we had met only 2 days earlier while on a trip together. For context, she is married and had claimed to be happily married for 3 to 4 years, and also said she had been in therapy for a long time and had improved her relationships. In the same conversation, she mentioned wanting to destroy her life, and then talked about going up to everyone inside a bar to offer them her cigarettes. It was very cringeworthy for me to hear, but I wasn't sure if she just wanted attention or a reaction from me. She also made it clear she didn't want me telling her husband about her inclination to sleep with any man on the street. I did end up telling her husband about the self-destructive part, but nothing about the cheating out of concern that she might be in a self-harm type of headspace. In hindsight, I think it was attention-seeking behavior, and I'm honestly unsure if I fell into a trap of giving her the attention and making her husband worried. Quite a headache, but she's not a friend I have to see frequently. Story 57. When I started working at a cafe, most customers were nice, but there was one man who was very curt and gruff. It was my first customer-facing job, and I hadn't developed a thicker skin yet, so I always felt like I was doing something wrong when helping him. I got pretty anxious every time he came in because I tried to be so nice and perfect, but it always felt like he was being mean. I mentioned it to a coworker, and she told me he was actually friendly but dealt with a lot of back pain, which made him surly. That immediately changed my perspective, and I stopped feeling so uptight when serving him. I think he noticed too and warmed up a little with me. Mind you, some customers were just awful, like the woman who smacked my coworker's hand for putting too much cream in her coffee. It was during COVID, and we were handling sugar and dairy to avoid shared contact. While putting cream in the coffee, she reached through the divider, smacked my coworker's hand, and spilled hot coffee all over her. The woman was told to leave and never come back. Story 58. I had a coworker who was harassing me. We'll call her the Mint Bish. We worked in a clean room at a factory together on the same CNC machine, me on second shift and her on first. Semi-relevant. She was more than twice my age, and I was closer in age to her high school freshman son. One day, our shift supervisor found a bag of Lifesaver mints in the CNC machine desk drawer. He and I didn't get along, but he knew I wasn't a liar. I told him I hate mint with the passion of 100 burning suns, so the mints were thrown away. The next day, she immediately asked if I had thrown them away. I told her I hadn't. She then started messing with the machine to make my life harder, not realizing I wasn't dumb and could usually spot the problem 9 times out of 10 and knew it was her being petty. Well, she had been on the machine 6 months longer than I had, yet she couldn't produce more than 200 units a day. Not even that actually, since she would sometimes claim my work. Meanwhile, I quickly reached 500 units a day. The Mint Bish always had a bunch of excuses, but the machine hadn't suddenly changed. She just wasn't doing her job. As the harassment got worse, my mental health deteriorated, and it still hasn't fully recovered. I finally snapped. It turned out she had told her best friend on first shift that she was cheating on her husband. I did some digging and found in her notebook, like a high school girl, that she had written her name alongside his name over and over, with hearts and everything. She even had a restaurant reservation written down. She also had her address written in the notebook, and I knew she used her husband's last name. I did some sleuthing and discovered everything about her affair partner as well. I wrote her husband a long, anonymous letter explaining that she had been cheating on him with a man named Matthew who worked at a local construction company. I included his phone number, social media accounts, and even mentioned that they seemed to have a date scheduled on a certain day. I told myself she had one more chance to mess with me, and then I would mail it. A few days after I wrote the letter, everyone except my shift was laid off, so I never had to send it. Story 59. Back at university, I had 2 friends, a male and a female, whom I really liked. Somehow, I always felt they were closer to each other than to me, but it didn't bother me. After all, they were in the same classes and saw each other every day, while I was in a different degree program. A couple of months later, my female friend told me they were sleeping together for fun, but she had developed feelings for him. The male, however, gave her the impression that he might be developing feelings too, though he was still grieving his ex-girlfriend, who had died in a car accident 2 years prior. I was rooting for their relationship, until I later found out from a mutual childhood friend that he had been using his dead girlfriend's story to manipulate women. After that, I could never look at him the same way again. My friend broke up with him, and they never spoke again. Story 60. My little sister, who is 25 and has a closer relationship with my wife than with me, recently confided to my wife that she caught an STI because an awful ex-boyfriend persuaded her to participate in an orgy. She said she couldn't tell me because she sees me as a father figure, and he was never around. I had noticed changes in her weight, eating habits, and mood, and suspected something was wrong. When I tried to talk to her, she only mentioned having stomach problems, so I let it go. Now my wife couldn't keep the secret and told me. I feel truly sad for my sister and want to support her, but I worry that if I bring it up, I might push her away, or even strain my relationship with my wife. She has already gone through treatment and seems to be back to her normal routine, so maybe this is in the past, and revisiting it could do more harm than good. I don't know what to do. I just feel sad. I've always wanted to protect her. Story 61. A guy I'm friends with, let's call him Tyler, has been dating a woman, Lily, for about a year and a few months. I've always thought she was a nice enough person. We haven't spoken much, and we don't see Tyler all that often, but she seemed sweet. In July, I went to a mutual friend's birthday party. We had drinks, played games, and listened to music. At some point, politics and climate change came up. Lily said that she and Tyler don't believe in it. I was completely dumbfounded. How can you not believe in science? I explained that climate change is real and a growing problem. She responded, IDK, Tyler explained it to me and I don't believe in it. I just slowly turned to Tyler in disbelief. And honestly, that's literally the tamest thing about these two. 2 months later, in late September, I was at the house of the friends who had hosted the birthday party. Tyler and Lily weren't there. At some point, the conversation turned to something I wasn't following, so I asked what they were talking about. That's when they told me that Tyler had been cheating on Lily for 10 whole months. Keep in mind, they had only been together for about a year, so he had been two-timing her for the majority of their relationship. I was in complete shock, jaw on the floor. They told me not to say anything, because Lily already knew and had decided to stay with him. She knows everything, and still chose to stay? It completely changed how I saw them. Tyler as a trifling, cheating little boy, and Lily as a woman who stays with a cheater. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.